So for those of you who don't know Emily, I don't think there'll be many, but in any case, she's basically an ELT professional with loads of experience in the classroom, over 20 years. So that's pretty solid. She's written various materials, both in print format and digitally, including National Geographic's Learning Voices series, which I'm sure you've heard of. She's really passionate about diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is super fitting for this year's theme. And obviously the use of visual tools. She's really big on visual tools, sketch notes, and graphic facilitation strategies to make learning more engaging, I would say in general, more fun, but also more accessible. And her teacher development courses with a visual twist have been described as the nicest corner of the internet. So if you've seen Emily's sketches, they're actually really, really cool. You can find more about her at her website, www.emilybrysonelt.com. And follow her on Instagram, and it's the same username. So Emily Bryson ELT, both on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. So basically all over the place. So, I mean, seriously, thanks so much for being here tonight. I don't know what time it is in Chile.
Afternoon.
Yeah, so, okay. Oh, Oli
Thanks
is
so much for having me.
Oh, Ollie's already saying not being face-to-face, but virtual hugs. Okay, cool. We were saying with Emily that if you have any questions, you can drop them in the chat and we'll deal with them later at the end of the session. Okay. And yep, I really hope you enjoy today's session. I think you will need pen and paper. Yep, pretty basic. So if you don't have
pen, paper, you will be
something to
drawing,
sit
and I
on,
promise it's
go
going to
grab
be
it really
easy.
quick. Yeah.
So
So
if you're afraid of drawing, don't be, because
exactly. So this is your
that's
ego
what I
boost
do, is
drawing
make people
session.
less afraid of drawing.
All right. So thanks so much, Emily. Whenever you're ready, the floor is yours.
Okay, thanks. So thanks so much for having me today. It's lovely to be here. My session is entitled Tiny Changes for Big Impacts, and the reason for that is because we all different backgrounds. They come from, they all have different learning needs, and it's almost impossible to teach a class of learners that are exactly the same level, that have exactly the same needs. That's just never ever going to happen. So I think we always have a mixed ability classroom to some extent. And the good thing is that you can make simple changes to have a big impact. So you don't need to go in with 25 lesson plans or 40 lesson plans or 15, depending on how many students you have. One is perfectly fine. So I'm going to start with, we're going to be using annotation tools today, and I just want to make those as accessible as possible because I know that not everybody is familiar with the annotation tools in Zoom. So at the top of the screen, or maybe at the bottom, you will see a green bar. And that green bar says you are viewing Emily Bryson's screen. Um, uh, can you go there? And then here you will see something that says annotate, or maybe you will see a little pen icon, something like this. If you're on a mobile phone or a tablet, you will see this bar. But if you could just find the annotation tools and make some sort of mark, any messy mark you like, on the screen so that I know that you know how to work annotation tools, that would be great. Okay, so Graham's fine. Somebody else is fine. Good. And you can play around with the stamps. There are little stamps. This is actually quite an old one. I realise now that I need to update because Zoom has had some updates. There's these nice little stamps here as well that you can use. So you can play with those too. Okay, somebody's done a lovely love heart. That's great. Good. Okay, so let me just delete all my drawings. And I had to delete all drawings. Annotate, delete all drawings. Okay. And delete that too. Okay, so let's move on to First, so I am a graphic facilitator. I got into it maybe 2016-ish when I was on secondment at the Scottish Refugee Council. And I just realised that it was a great way of making learning accessible and multisensory and getting students out of their seats and bringing a bit of imagination and life into the classroom. And in graphic facilitation, we use a lot of visual metaphors and visual tools, such as this doesn't seem to be working. It doesn't. The only problem with annotation tools is they don't work very well when with Fresco. So this one, show this. Okay. So in graphic facilitation, we use a lot of visual metaphors and visual stories. So this is a little person, and it refers to oops. So this hot air balloon has um, visual metaphor of feeling confident, um, and the or the metaphor of staying on the ground. Um, how do you feel about teaching mixed ability classes at the moment? Do you feel that you are super confident and you've had lots of practice with it? Or do you feel like you need a lot more practice with it? If you could just make a mark somewhere along this line to show where you are here. Okay, so Nuria feels like she needs more practice. Graham's in the middle. So I often find that using these little stories and little doodles can take the emotion out of and the stress away from learners. So maybe if students aren't feeling confident, but they don't want to say, I don't feel confident, then it's maybe easier for them to express as a visual image or a metaphor in that way. And this particular image is super simple to draw. And throughout, I'm going to show you different ways of drawing. So, so that you can use all these activities in class. So to draw a hot air balloon, you can start with a circle and then add a rectangle. I could change the color actually, it's not a great color. And then draw another line and then a couple of M shapes. And then you can just draw another couple of lines down the middle there. Or if you prefer, you can start with the rectangle and then add the circle and the M's and then go across. And all the drawings that I'll be showing you, they don't need to be perfect. It's not about it's about communication. It's not about art. It's about getting your point across and telling a story. So this particular image, I drew it beforehand. I drew it before I came in. I actually drew it with pen and paper, and then I took a photo of it with cam scanner, and then I uploaded it onto my computer. So you can do that, or you can draw it live if you prefer. But obviously, sometimes my confidence levels with drawing live can be about here too. So, okay, so it's good to see that we've got quite a mixed level. We'll do this again at the end and see, hopefully, people will be closer and flying in their hot air balloon. Will have all taken off and feel a lot more confident. Um, so, uh, okay, so why is teaching mixed ability classes so important? Um, Learners are obviously all different levels. So some learners might be here. Sorry. Some learners might be here and they might need quite a lot of support. So for example, if you have an elementary class, maybe this learner is a high beginner or a low beginner, but there's no space for them maybe in a class of their level, or that it's maybe the first day there. So they maybe need a bit more support. This student's right in the middle, they're a perfect elementary learner. And then there's this student who studies a lot and has managed to fly throughout the year, and actually they're getting a little bit bored in class, if anything. So what we need to do as teachers is create learning spaces that support all learners. So this learner can have some nice, easy, small steps, and this learner can be challenged enough that they feel like they're also learning too. And that can be quite a challenge for teachers, and I think it can be quite daunting as well for teachers, especially because it takes long enough to prepare a class. Okay, so but the good news is that we don't need to prepare a million different lessons. So if we were to prepare a million different lessons for our students, this would be what our course books would look like. Not great. Or we would maybe have stacks and stacks of paper, which just isn't realistic. And but I've got some ideas to show you today, which will make it nice and simple. So I'd like to first have a look at this visual story. So you're all probably familiar with the story of the tortoise and the hare. And some learners are tortoises, some learners are hares. Some learners work really hard and work really fast, but then maybe some days they get so confident that they don't do as well as somebody who's maybe not as confident and is maybe taking it a bit more steadily and a bit more slowly. And what we want to do is get the tortoises and the hares over the finish line to pass all their assessments and to be successful, confident learners. So what I'd like you to do is in the annotation, when you annotate, can you give me reasons why learners are maybe hares and reasons why learners are maybe tortoises? What is it that's holding some learners back that makes them, what are the barriers that our learners have, or the reasons for maybe being overconfident or not confident enough or not succeeding? Can you just write some on the screen, or if you prefer, you can write them in the chat, because that's one way of making things accessible, is to give students options and giving participants options. So please write in the chat reasons for being a tortoise or a hare. Hares or tortoises. Yep, learning difficulties. That's one of them. They might be shy. That's another reason for being a tortoise as well. I think a lot of what we do as language teachers is giving them the confidence to speak and to use their English and to make mistakes and to know that mistakes are learning experiences. Hares do not invest, yes, perhaps. Maybe hares are at a good, strong level, so they maybe don't spend as much time. Maybe tortoises work a little bit harder. What else? Their levels not up on the right level in the course as well, because we don't always have the opportunity to put student in the exact perfect class as well, I think. Okay, so nobody's a fan of writing in the annotation tools. That's okay. Okay, so here are some of my reasons that I've identified for barriers to learning and how we can actually support them. So I've created this sketch note. It was for a different webinar that I'd created. And these are accessible teaching tips. Yes, I do see what you're writing, whoever's writing it. It's working. Thank you for trying out the annotation tools. Um, eh, so these are floating around the internet, and this is probably my most shared sketch note. And I think the reason for that is because it's so important to make our lessons as accessible as possible. And I've focused not only on things like learning differences, sorry, switching between annotation tools and Adobe Fresco drawings, which is a bit confusing. Okay, so we're focused not only on things like neurodiversity, like ADHD and autism, dyscalculia, dyslexia, but also on things like digital skills and literacy. For many years, I taught ESOL, so English to speakers of other languages in Scotland, and that was to mostly people from refugee backgrounds. And a lot of the time, I found that students had very low digital skills, which meant that they couldn't go home and read their emails or upload their writing homework or complete tasks like on a language learning app. So I found that one way of dealing with that is getting them to learn one skill at a time. To use the yeah, that you draw one practice one skill at a time. So once they maybe get them to log into the computer, and then once they've mastered that, move on to the next thing. Once they've got, much like you do in English, once you practice one piece of grammar, and then move on to the next piece of grammar, for example. Give them lots of practice, and then maybe pair them with digital buddies. That's one way. The other, when it comes to literacy, focusing on sounds and spelling. So do a lot of phonics practice in the class. Allow them to copy. If I was learning Arabic, for example, or Chinese, for example, I would definitely want to have as much practice as possible and copy a lot. Review things and review the information and repeat. And what you'll actually notice with all of these tips is that if you do this for one student with literacy learning, you'll also support learners that have other accessibility needs. So, for example, with dyslexia, things like copying, repetition can be also very helpful. So, learners with dyslexia, learners that maybe have additional needs when it comes to learning, reading, writing, spelling, but learners with dyslexia also may have trouble with organisation. They might find it difficult to schedule. They might be that class that's always late or quite disorganised. So giving students some support on how to manage their time can be very helpful. Things like trying different fonts. There is research to show that different fonts don't actually work, but I personally prefer different fonts. I particularly don't like serif fonts. Serif fonts, so that's the ones with the little curls around it. They're meant to be more difficult to read. And personally, I don't like them, but other people do. So yeah, try out different fonts, see what their students like. Use graphics. A lot of learners with dyslexia are very creative and like to try drawing, etc. Learners with ADHD, now ADHD's big on everybody's lips at the moment. Everybody's talking about it. It's being diagnosed more and more, especially in adults. So people with the ADHD might find it hard to concentrate. They might be thinking on lots of different things at one time. So one way of getting them to focus is to minimize the distractions in the classroom. So that could be like closing the curtains or blanking out certain spaces on a PowerPoint, for example. Getting them to cover certain sections of their course book so they're only focusing on one activity. Also, learners with ADHD might want to work really quite quickly, like the hair, for example. Might want to be finished really quickly, then get distracted and have a little nap, and then start again. So encourages them to take their time. And if they want to get up and move around, they can get up and move around. Learners with autism like to have a routine. They might not interact so well with other students in the class. They might like to work alone, and that's okay if they want to work alone. Why not let them work alone? Avoid idioms and metaphors with people with autism. Some students might not understand, and actually, graphic graphic facilitation uses a lot of idioms and metaphors, like for example, the tortoise and the hare. But learners with autism might not necessarily get that story, in which case you could maybe ask them to create their own ideas and visuals, for example, or use a different strategy. And using visual calendars is very helpful. Using visual calendars is helpful for everybody. I think it's also much more fun. Dyscalculia, I won't go into too much detail. It's basically having struggling with numbers, which I think we don't necessarily cover quite so much in language classes, but there are strategies to use it. Things like avoiding memorizing and using multisensory tools, they can be helpful. If learners have a sensory impairment, use a large double-spaced font and provide text, and don't rely on colour to convey meaning. So, for example, especially avoid colour combinations like red and green together, because learners with colour blindness might not see them. If they have mobility issues, chat to them, find out what adjustments you can make. And for study skills, get them to plan things together, just notebook layout, and set goals. So I'm going to give you some tools and activities that you can use in class to do all of these things very shortly. And the most important thing with your learners to make learning accessible is to ask the learner how it helps them. Because one thing that works for one learner with dyslexia might not work for another learner with dyslexia, for example. Create a welcoming atmosphere, and give clear instructions. I often find that giving instructions twice and rephrasing them can help. I think I was advised not to do this in the diploma, but I often find that students need them, writing them on the whiteboard as well, so that they are always there and clear. And I like to have little drawings on the whiteboard with my instructions and to build their confidence as well. So, if you have any comments throughout, just please, or questions, just add them in the chat. So I'd like you to use your annotation tools again here. So this is my whiteboard before and after I learned graphic facilitation skills, or brought more drawings into the classroom. I'd like you to mark which whiteboard do you think is the most accessible to learners? And if you're not keen on the annotation tools, you can write right or left in the chat. Yep. Okay, that's pretty much the response I always get when I do this activity. Okay, now if you could mark again, which one is the most memorable? Yep. And if you could mark again, if you were learning a language with a new script or a new language, which one would you want on your whiteboard in your class, in your language classroom? Which one would you want your teacher to use? Yeah, exactly. The power of the visual. And actually, there has been studies, the drawing effect. Some research by researchers called Whammies and Mead, and they found that if you draw pictures whilst learning vocabulary, so if you make a list of words in a vocabulary notebook, you're less likely to remember than if you write a list of words with pictures. So it aids memory and it makes learning more accessible. And found that students, when I use it in class, like you'll notice, for example, this foot's terrible. But it's okay because it's obvious that it's a foot. It doesn't need to be perfect. There's something strange going on with it, but that's okay. And actually, having imperfect drawings in class shows your students that it's okay to also have imperfect drawings. Um, and I did a bit of action research a couple of years ago or in action research where I didn't ask my students to copy my drawings and instead just drew in class. And actually, I found that the students just over time started copying me and started copying my doodles without me ever encouraging them to do that. So it was like creating a nice safe space to use those simple drawings in class. And I'm going to teach you how to draw some of these in class. Like, for example, this what is basically just a circle and then a rectangle and a rectangle. Sorry, Zoom annotation tools are a bit pixely. They're not the best. It's better on, I'll use my Adobe Fresco next. It's much clearer. And you'll notice the cheese is basically just a rectangle and then another triangle and then some little circles. The book is, sorry, I'm going to not use the Zoom tools because they're not as good. Uh, I'll show you all these later as we work through. I'll get a proper activity going. Uh, Clear my drawings. Clear all drawings. And then, okay. Okay, so one thing that you can do to make your lessons a bit more accessible is to, at the beginning of class, show them the process that you're going to go through. So this could be at the beginning of year for the curriculum, for example, step one. Um, Step one, step two, step three, like week one, week two, week three. You could have the red ones as, for example, grammar. You could have the yellow ones for vocabulary, the orange ones for spelling, for example. Um, um, and that just gives them it helps them to organize what they're going to do and gives them a clear idea of what they're going to be doing as well. If you want to make it a bit more fun, you could have like the visual story of the goal is to reach the magical island where English is proficient and everything is rosy and um, they don't need to worry about anything. At the beginning, life can be a bit cloudy and lacking in confidence. Maybe got some dark clouds here as well. And then as you move further towards the magical island of happiness, the sun comes out too. So you can add this kind of thing. And then week one, week two, week three, for example. Okay, so I'm going to show you now how to draw some of these because they are very simple. So the first one is the footsteps. So if everybody got a pen and a notepad, it was your turn. So the footsteps basically start with like a capital H, but without the line in the middle. And then you're going to draw a kind of really big, wonky D, like capital D, and then a smaller backwards capital D. And that's your footstep. And then you can draw another footstep. So H without the line, big D, and then a small d. So all these shapes and drawings that I'll be showing you basically involve lines, squares, triangles, circles, and they're really simple and they're really quick because no students really want to watch you spending forever on the whiteboard creating a Da Vinci masterpiece. Not you specifically, just any teacher, including me. Okay, and then the nice little sailboat is a line, and then a couple of make it into a triangle, and then another line, and then a little circle, and you can add a little wave for a boat. So I'll do that twice to make it, because as I said, repetition is good, and I might have been too fast the first time. So make it into a triangle. Okay, does anybody want to share? Does anybody want to turn on their videos and share their pictures? Feel free to do that, or feel free to tag me later on in socials if you want to share at Emily Bryson ELT. Nobody wants to turn on their screen? Maybe later, once you've got more of a collection. Okay. So the other thing that you can do with your learners is make vocabulary notebooks and to give them the study skills to succeed and to practice at home. I often found that some of my learners hadn't had the educational training. They didn't have the educational experience because maybe they hadn't completed high school. Some of them hadn't completed primary school. So in class, or even had the opportunity to go to any primary school at all. So in class, we did a lot of work on students' books and study and how to take notes effectively so that when they went home, things made sense to them. They didn't just write down a whole load of like words in English just by themselves with no meaning. So you can create this like a vocabulary notebook um, with like a little cloud around the word, maybe a little speech bubble of how to say it in their language, maybe a picture, and then just maybe a square, simple square with an example sentence. I'm going to hide this and then just show you some other ways to draw. So the thought clouds, I'm sure you could turn this into a thought. Speech bubble, I'm sure you're all quite familiar with those. If you wanted to make a picture frame, then just add some little C shapes. And I would say write the word first and then put the frame around it, because otherwise you'll end up with something like this. So you want to have the frame first and then the word. Um, so in graphic facilitation, we call these containers. And the lovely thing about container is basically an icon drawn really big, and then you can use it to contain information. So if you think about like a graphic organizer where information is organized, you can have a container, and you could use, for example, that boat as a container. Maybe you make the flag a bit bigger, and then you could get students to add ideas, or week one, this is what we're doing, for example. Other containers that I love are the light bulb, which is a circle, and then a U shape, and then a Z, and then an M. And then you can get them to add their ideas in that. You can also use it for creativity, critical thinking. I quite like to draw that really, really big on the whiteboard, and then you can get them to add their ideas with post-it notes. So the beauty of these container activities is they're a good way of getting students out of their seats. They're a good way of getting them to collaborate on ideas. You can use them in lots of different ways, which makes them really multisensory, very multimodal. So great for lots of different types of learning. Um, what else do I like to draw? Okay, yeah, the notebook. I love drawing a notebook. So you can draw like a notebook in class, really big on your whiteboard. So that's just a rectangle. And then you've got some, you can either do like a spiral down the side to show that it's spiral bound, or you can add some little C shapes at the side to show that it's spiral bound. And if you draw that really big, you can basically show them exactly how you want them to lay out their notebook. So like, for example, title of the session, date, maybe you've got your vocabulary here and then your grammar here, and then just add little sections. And you can use different containers for each section, and you can decide what each one is. So I'm going to show you one. This is how I used that container, this idea in class for a container activity. So how I learn English, um, I created a whole load of containers in class, put it on my dirty whiteboard, because this is reality and whiteboards are dirty. Um, and then I asked them to add their ideas um, using post-it notes. So how I learn English. Um, Here you'll see how I learn English. Somebody has written that they like to use Duolingo, translation tools. So that's for apps that they use. Um, Podcasts. Somebody loves the British Council podcast. One of my students loves the British Council podcast, and that means that they can share their ideas and their own methods of learning English with me, with other students. And what I found quite interesting was here a lot of students learn with videos. Like here, they've got 8 different ideas here in this videos section. So for me, that and learning from books much less popular than learning from videos. And they gave some ideas of quite a lot of different YouTube channels that they liked as well when they were talking about it more. So I'll show you how to draw each of those containers so that you can use them in class. So let me just hide this. Okay, so books is a rectangle. I tend to do the rectangle a little bit of an angle, and then just a couple of lines, 2 or 3 little lines to draw them. And you'll see that each of these takes less time than it takes to write a word. So on the whiteboard, you can write books and then book. You can do that for homework as well. You can have like an icon that you always use for homework, for example, the notebook icon. And then they've got a visual on the whiteboard that says the instruction and what it refers to. So what were the books? Podcasts. So podcasts, and a lot of these can be used and reused for lots of different purposes as well. So podcasts. That could be listening. That doesn't look quite right. What I've done there, I think. So it's an N and then a couple of little squares on the side. And then if they're really avidly listening, maybe they've got like closed eyes. So they're listening and thinking at the same time. But of course, if it's a container, you might want to keep that blank so that students can add if they've got space to write or they've got space to put their ideas in, for example. Or maybe you put that in with a different colour. Um, and in class, so the classroom is basically a rectangle, and then a little person. So the person is an arm, and then a circle, and then another like an N shape. And actually, so if you just do one person, you can just do that. If you want to do lots of people, you can have a couple of M's and then add the legs. If you want to have students in your classroom, then you can have those little M shapes and then add the heads. And if you want to make them all paying attention, you can give them some hair. And maybe one student is not paying attention, so you put them facing the other way. Which other ones? There was the TV screen, so that can be used. This could be like a TV. You could add like a little play button for a video, or you could make it into a desktop computer by adding a rectangle, some little lines, and some little crisscrosses, and a little mouse. And they all just need to give the idea of what the drawing is. It doesn't need to be perfect. The laptop is, sorry, I did that really quickly. The laptop is a rectangle and then a couple of diagonal lines and then a longer line. And then you can add another line here. And if you want to add a keyboard, again, some little crisscrosses. And you can add like a reflection onto each of these screens as well, if you like. What was the other one in there? Well, there was a radio as well, wasn't there? Radio is yet another rectangle, and then a big circle, and then maybe a small rectangle beside it, and then a line. So you can use these to get students to plan out their notebooks, to tidy up their notebooks. Also, when I'm sketchnoting, I pay much more attention. So you could actually teach them to draw these icons themselves and encourage them to take visual notes in class, which can help them to focus. So if a learner is maybe finding it difficult to concentrate, maybe because they've got ADHD or maybe because they just find it hard to concentrate, you can get them to start taking visual notes. It's a good way of helping them focus. It's a good skill to have, and it's fun as well. It also makes your notes you're much more likely to look over your sketch notes than you are to look over your regular notes. It's what I've found. I definitely look back at my sketch notes more than I do at pages and pages and pages of words. And I'm also much more interested in looking at a sketch note that somebody else has created or an infographic than I am of reading pages and pages and pages of text. How do you feel about that? Can you write in the chat, what do you prefer? Words and pictures or just words? Oh, Nuria, you're making it. Lovely message saying that making drawing seems so easy. Honestly, it is like this graphic facilitation style of drawing, it's really simple. One of my friends said to me, so you basically just spent thousands of pounds teaching yourself how to um how to draw like a child. And I said, yes, yes, I have. But it brings joy into the classroom. It makes learning more accessible. It makes complex information less difficult. And it's really simple to do. Um, so got 20 minutes. Okay, so it's 20 past. Got about 10 minutes to go. So like to do one more activity. So this is a graphic organizer and it's really simple. So I often find that when students are asked to read, they're asked to read and then also read lots of really wordy questions. Or when they're asked to listen, they are asked to listen and read lots of wordy questions. So when they're listening, they've got a lot of things to process. But if they were listening and just looking at some pictures, like for example in this, they are only looking at 5 words. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And with each word, they've got a visual cue, like a person for who, a little signpost for where, a little watch or clock for when, some little representations of what, and then a little question mark for why. And that's all they need to think about when they're listening is who, where, when, what, why. For other activities, you can take a listening activity and make it into a container with 5 different containers, a container for each activity. You could get students to take the questions and create their own containers or create their own icons so that when they're listening, all they're doing is looking at pictures. And it makes it a lot more fun and it makes it a lot more engaging. So I'll quickly show you how to draw each of these, who, where, when, what, why, because I feel like they are probably the most used and probably the simplest way. So who, we've already done, really. It's an N shape and a circle. And you can add a little smiley face for who. And then you can add your own container shape if you like. You could make, like, for example, you could make that bigger. You could make the body part bigger and then they write inside it, or the head part bigger inside it and they write inside that. When is a circle and then a little L shape. I tend to go for it's always 3 o'clock. I'm sure you could make it 9 o'clock as well, but I tend to always make my life 3 o'clock for some reason. Or you could add on, as I said, make it into a what if you prefer. That's also a good one to know for doing things like this, that, these, those, because you can do these are watches and just draw multiple ones of that. And then have, like, for example, this is a watch. Because it takes so little time to draw it on the whiteboard. And then those are watches, for example. Okay. And okay, so who, when, where, where can be like a little drop pin like you would find on Google, for example, or like that. But I find that some students don't quite get that. So I find that a signpost can sometimes be better. So a little rectangle, a bit of grass, and then a little signpost. For where, so where, when, who, why. Why, if you can think of a better icon, please let me know. I haven't quite mastered why. The question marks, I don't know. I don't think it's as demonstrative as it could be. Um, so if you have any ideas in the chat, I can maybe visualize them. Why, and then what? What tends to be a sequence of different simple icons, like for example, an apple, pen, which is a rectangle, and a triangle. Um, you could have a dog, which is like a Nike tick tick, number 2, and then an L, and then you add the ear. But I got told off once for that because some people don't think that animals are its, so that's okay. It's a good point. Um, okay. yeah, for two. So I'm going to just wrap up now with a sketch note that I did at the BBELT conference last year. So you can find this on my website, emilybrysonelt.com/sketchnoting, and I've got a whole collection of all my different sketch notes, mostly of talks from the LA conference, the BBELT conference, last week, the Young Learners SIG at IATEFL conference as well. I haven't actually uploaded them to my website yet. They're floating around on YLT SIG socials at the moment. But if you want to look more at universal design for learning, that's a good way of this session with Maria Jose Galeno Valdez was absolutely brilliant at BBELT last year. And it was about ELT inclusion and technology, and it was focused around universal design for learning. And UDL basically removes the barriers to learning. And the barriers to learning are, for example, working memory, use of language, concentration, organization of work, and learning preferences. And with working memory, one way to get students to remember more is to use visuals, to make it multisensory and multimodal, like we talked about, and to use student-generated content. So maybe students come up with their own visual metaphors, or they come up with their own graphic organizers, or their own listening activities using containers. You can use assistive technologies like speech to text. For concentration, you can do things like minimizing distractions or get them to use sketchnoting, for example. Writing the instructions on the board and repeating your instructions. Maria also mentioned things like routines and ways of getting attention, such as like clapping or doing a little dance, having a bell, that kind of thing. Organizing your work, using templates, using the study planners that I showed you. Language portfolios, so creating a record of their learning. So maybe at the beginning of the year, you have a record of their learning and then see where they are at the end of the year. And learning preferences. So every learner is different. Some learners might love containers. Some students might not like containers at all. Using things like, but I think it's just playing around and seeing what works for your students and what works for you. Peer correction, and respect timings, teach them different timings. Okay, so to wrap up, I'm going to use the annotation tools one more time, and I hope that everybody feels a bit more like they're flying a little bit. How do you feel now about teaching mixed ability classes? Because actually the beauty of all these drawings is that students can, if there's a beginner student in your elementary class, they can write fewer words in the container, and the faster student that's super quick can write much more. So all these kind of activities are much more open to learner input and emergent language, which means that students can set their own level in a way and then it puts everybody on an equal footing. Okay, good to see that everybody's moved up a bit. Hurrah! I am happy. Or I am a son. Great. Okay, so if you want more information or ideas like this, I have loads and loads of freebies on my website, which is emilybrysonelt.com. These are some of my freebies. So I've got a book, A Quick Introduction to Graphic Facilitation for English Language Teachers. That's a free ebook. A free ebook on sketchnoting. I've got an active meditation for learners and teachers as well who aren't keen on just meditating and sitting quietly. One on greening ELT and one on phonics, so the sounds. I keep meaning to add more to this, but not getting time. So anybody got any questions? I think there's about 2 minutes left if you have any questions.
Yeah, I was taking a look at the chat. I think we're all really shy with the drawing and the and with sketchnoting. And we're all starting. At least I had my notepad, but I was a bit too shy to show it. So, but thank you.
Yeah. Does anybody want to show it now?
Yeah. Does
I bet
anybody
they're all amazing. I
learn?
see other people's work and I'm like, that's much better than mine.
I think it's also about confidence, just like it is
Yeah,
with,
it absolutely is.
it takes a bit of
It's
time.
learning, it's a visual vocabulary that can be learned just like learning any vocabulary, like in English. So the more confidence you are, the more vocabulary you have, and the more practice you've had to make it part of your motor skills,
Yeah.
then
I think it's all about
then it's
integrating.
much
It's all about
easier.
raising awareness, being aware that this is a strategy or like a set of strategies that you can use, and not only use occasionally, but like incorporate into your regular teaching.
Yeah, yeah.
And
I've
it's
actually found that it's reduced my prep time as well because I've always got these like ideas at the back of my head that I can use at any time.
right. You
Yeah.
know, it's great. It's really funny because it reminded me of my first ever English teacher. Her name was Mrs. Rui, and she was extremely good at drawing, but not like in the
Well,
elaborate sort of drawing style, but like very simple drawing, very, very accessible. It made it look really simple. And it was so much more memorable. I mean, you did remember the drawings on the board and how she did them with chalk. I mean, this was in the 80s.
uh-huh.
But it was really cool. And I mean, yeah, I mean, 40 years later, or like 30 years later, I still remember this because
That's
I
good.
used to draw them in my notebook as well, just like Mrs. Rui did. And what I
Yeah,
was saying earlier in the chat is that this style of drawing is also non-threatening to students because
exactly.
people are very good at drawing, but like very intricate sort of drawing. And this just seems so accessible, like almost anyone could do it.
Yeah,
So
yeah. It's basically just letters and shapes put together in different ways.
and the
Like
step
for
by step,
example, this,
like the H and then the sort of wonky D and the other. So, I mean, it just,
yeah.
yeah, it just makes it very, very accessible for everyone. Because otherwise, I think a lot of students might be put off by the fact that, oh yeah, yeah, you're very good at this, but I'm not. So
Exactly.
and sort of gets in the way. Well, in any case, people are saying, Michael was saying he likes picture books. We had a session with Andrew Moffat about picture books, and I think this is really linked together. Maria saying, thank you very much for sharing many interesting and useful ideas. Nuria saying, before sketching in my class and making a fool of myself, I certainly need to practice at home. Okay. But I think this is what I was saying. It's not
Ah,
about doing
making
it
a fool of yourself's
perfectly.
the most fun thing.
Yeah,
If you make a fool of yourself, your students will be happy to make a fool of themselves too. And then you can have
exactly.
a
It
good laugh
connects the
about it.
two. It enhances the bond.
Yeah.
Okay. Somebody said, I just downloaded your book. Thank you. I really enjoy watching you drawing.
Ah,
It's very relaxing to see you sort of draw step by step. And actually, yeah,
there's that too. So there's the therapeutic aspect of it as well. So learners that have mental health problems, and actually the active meditation's great for that. Because it's basically drawing like a sensory, oh, what do you call it? Like, oh, the meditate, I've forgotten the word for it. When you do the meditation, like a body scan meditation. So you're
right.
scanning your five senses, what you can hear, what you can see, what you feel, but it's active
Well,
and you're
sounds really
drawing it.
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm aware of the
I'm just
time. I
really
don't know
sorry
when your
that we're
next session
gonna have
starts.
to leave it here because yeah, the next session is starting. But in any case, thanks a million for being here today, well, being with us today. And thanks a million for all the ideas. I
Thanks so
think
much for having me.
we
I've
now
loved
need
it.
to explore all the possibilities of actually bringing this into the classroom on a regular basis and like incorporating all of this. So, yep, thanks a lot. And for all of you who are still staying, we
Thank
have
you.
a closing plenary with Esperanza Roman. And I wish you a very pleasant evening, afternoon, depending on what time is it in Chile, because I really don't know. And yeah, hope to see you really soon in Barcelona or maybe online again.
Yeah, I hope so. Love Barcelona.
Take care, Emily.
And okay, bye.
Bye.